one thing that I have been unclear on is the where the rubber meets the road in terms of economic ramifications of the decisions that these major studios and smaller studios are making in terms of their storytelling. So it seems, at least on YouTube, widely recognized that Marvel Phase 4 was not a hallmark of cinematic masterpiece, that people were disappointed with their movies. As someone who has seen, I think, like pretty much every Marvel movie up until Endgame, it became increasingly easy for me to skip movies and not have it be to make a point or to like put my foot down, but just because I was genuinely not expecting to be entertained or enjoy my experience in my home or the theater. So do you have any understanding of like, is that affecting them? Or, because I've also seen that there's movies that people pan, like Aladdin, the remake, that I'm pretty sure made $1 billion for Disney and was just like, yes, 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 more of this.
Yeah. They are a weird scenario, these live action remakes that they do, because in any creative sense, you can pretty much just accuse them of bankruptcy, because they're just rehashing the same story over again. It's like, it's the most uncreative thing you could do. It's like, we'll just take this original script, we'll just remake it in live action. Where's the imagination? Where's the magic that goes into that? And yet, like you say, they make money somehow. I don't know if it's just parents who watched them as kids, you know, grew up in the 90s, and now you're you know, a parent yourself, and it's like, well, I want to have a bit of nostalgia, and my kids will be amused for an hour or two. I'll take them to go see this thing, because generally parents with kids are fairly easily amused. You know what I mean? It doesn't take a huge amount. So there could be that aspect of it. There seems to be more of a backlash against The Little Mermaid that's coming out. I think because they've race swapped the actress, and the CGI looks pretty horrible, and it's, I don't know. This could be the one that sort of breaks that winning streak for these animated or these live action remakes. I know Cruella de Vil didn't do well, but that happened in the pandemic, so you can't really apply normal rules to that. But yeah, outside of those, the economics do start to hurt them, I think, because, I mean, what can you say? Like, when you're spending $250 million to make one of these big Marvel movies, not to mention probably another couple $100 million on advertising, you're needing to get to something like 800 million now just to break even at the box office. And so if you're not making that, you can't keep releasing a product that's losing money for you. You know, it's just not economically viable. You know, a company as large as Disney or a franchise as large as Marvel, they don't just lose their momentum overnight, but eventually that takes its toll. And it's happened at companies like Warner Brothers, who made the DC movies. You know, they have had flop after flop. They never even like reached the heights of Marvel. They just kind of stalled on takeoff, and they've been stumbling ever since to try and fix the problem. But with them, because they didn't have that success initially, they've basically run out of money. And so what they had to do was bring in a guy who's completely ruthless, who will say, right, this project, that project looks like absolute garbage, kill it immediately. We're not even releasing it. You know, they had a movie called Batgirl that was due to be out this year. It was shot. It was all ready to go. They killed it and deleted the whole thing. It'll never see the light of day, probably. And it cost them almost $100 million to make. That was a $100 million write-off, because they knew it would cost more to release it, to try and advertise it, than they would make. And so they said, what's the point? We'll just kill it. And so that's an example of where Marvel could be headed if they carry on like this.
So the simple, just so I'm understanding, the simple math they did was there's a marketing budget that this is going to cost us, and then there's what we'll get back is goodwill from putting this on our streaming and making people want to watch the universe. They did the math and said this is so bad that it's got none of that. Because
I think what they can do is, like, if it get cancelled altogether and doesn't get released, they can do it as a tax write-off, because it's just an expense then. So they do save a little bit of money from doing it, but yeah, essentially all that time, all that resources, all the people that worked on it was all for nothing, just a complete waste, because they knew it was shit, and so there was no point in putting it out.
So that guy's come into DC. Has Marvel had those internal shakeups inside the company? I know that Bob Iger's back at Disney. I don't know how that impacts Marvel.
I mean, they fired Victoria Alonso, who was a pretty senior. She was probably like second in command almost at Marvel. There was Kevin Feige, and then there was her, and she was responsible for a lot of the VFX side of things. Which partly explains why their VFX look like garbage over the past couple of years. And yeah, she got fired So, like, I think partly it was down to a lot of accusations that she was really difficult to work with and caused a lot of strife amongst her subordinates. Yeah, and partly, she was perhaps a bit of a fall guy. But,
Yeah.
we'd have to see how well the thing continues to perform. It might be that if they keep releasing flop after flop, then more people will get fired. Disney themselves, they're firing like thousands of employees or making them, redundant. Because they're losing money, and it's just down to their creative decisions that they've made.
There also seems to be a thing, which it exists in YouTube, it exists in Hollywood, which is you don't pay the price of your bad decisions immediately. So when you've got a string of movies that people like, and I think of sometimes the X-Men franchise where like First Class didn't perform quite as well, but then the ones came after it, I think benefited from like what an interesting new take that was on the superheroes. Phase 4, I don't think suffered as much as it should have because it followed Phase 3 in Avengers Endgame. But my guess is that when you see the team ups between all of these new heroes whose names I honestly don't know, despite having seen like the girl from Multiverse of Madness, the all the young female scientific genius girls that are now in that universe, I think that there will probably, my guess is, be a huge drop in the comparison of that with what would have been the Avengers team up from a prior generation.
I mean, we're already seeing it. Ant-Man and the Wasp was a real flop. Thor: Love and Thunder, I don't think that did particularly well. You had a couple of the movies in Phase 4 that outright flopped, but partly that was down to the pandemic at the time. Black Widow and what was the other one? The Eternals. Yeah, they both did terrible numbers, but movie theaters weren't full back then. But yeah, like the numbers don't lie, and that phase didn't even have an Avengers team up movie. It just kind of like petered out like a wet fart. It's just nothing to it, It was weird.
Yeah, I agree. So what? I mean, it sounds like there's a couple different camps, and one of the things that occurs to me as I watch your videos that there is this silent center of the world, this majority of people that decides whether to go spend their $20 at the movie or whether to watch it on streaming. One of the clearest divisions of that is on Rotten Tomatoes, where you see these audience scores that mismatch the critic score so tremendously. Do you have an understanding of how and why the sample size of critics that are popular today so mischaracterizes the general movie-going audience?
Oh yeah, with the critics, like a lot of this just comes down to like access. Like I think Nerdrotic, he refers to them as the access media, and it's exactly what it is. It's all quid pro quo. Like you give our movie a good review, hey, we'll make sure you get to the premiere and give you all kinds of goodies and stuff like that. It's just you get treated as the favored critics, but it's all contingent on you being nice to them, and so they're not gonna criticize these movies. And there's that aspect of it, and there's the kind of socio-political dimension to it, where a lot of them are, particularly if they're journalists working for major news outlets, they're probably going to be really strongly progressive and left-wing. And so if you get a movie with like progressive politics in it, like strong women or tackling racial issues or whatever, they will be very unlikely to criticize it because they don't want to get accused of being bigoted or whatever it might be. And so there's that as well. It becomes like a shield for these people. But then the audience members, they don't have any of those constraints. They don't have to impress anyone, and they don't need to maintain their access to things. They can just be honest. And so I trust the audience scores way more than I trust the professional critics.